So the report that's in front of you members follows last month's committee, and the application is brought back to members with reasons for refusal and to discuss the issues that were raised in the debate at the last month's meeting. So the debate covered a number of different issues, but the consensus of members, and the issue that was raised more than any other, was concerns about the under-provision of affordable housing at 15% rather than 30%. And the report considers this specifically at 2.3 to 2.8. So point 2.6 in the report outlines that the key matter is what harm results from the provision of less than 30% of housing, whether or not that outweighs both the evidence that's been produced by the applicant and ratified by the council's independent expert, and the other benefits of providing an allocated housing site. So it's whether or not they outweigh those benefits. Now, the reason for refusal that's been prepared is outlined at the end of the paragraph, specifically trying to capture the concerns of members that were raised to do with the acute issues of affordability in the district and picking up some of the points that were raised. Therefore, that's why it's referred to the housing strategy, the objectively assessed need to pull that evidence forward. Now, as the report goes on to outline, the officer view is that the viability evidence and the compliance, therefore, because it's been demonstrated that it wouldn't be viable with more than 15% affordable housing, outweighs that specific concern, and then a refusal on that ground would put the council at risk if the application was appealed. And in addition, the concern is that the under-provision of affordable housing wouldn't, in our view, outweigh the benefits of providing 450 houses on an allocated site when the council is in presumption in favour of development under the housing delivery test, and plus the benefits that were outlined in the report to the actual strategic highway network by providing this route around Coffin House Corner. The report goes through the other issues raised, and I'll just pick up some of the points that were raised in the speakers' comments. These are covered at points 2.9 to 2.13, including flood risk, impact on healthcare, and impact on biodiversity. So to pick up the first one with regards to flood risk, a flood risk assessment was provided with the application. That was assessed by KCC as the local lead flood authority. That looked not only at the existing surface water flooding that occurs on the site, but also the strategy of how you deal with flooding when there are the dwellings that are proposed actually on the site. That's why there are drainage solutions that have been proposed, including the attenuation basin, to deal with that issue. Now, KCC, as the local lead flood authority, have confirmed that the strategy is sound, and therefore the proposal would actually include a number of conditions which would secure the submissions of details when the detailed layout comes out, to ensure that there isn't an increase in surface water outside the site as a result of this development. And in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, it's not considered, therefore, as a cogent reason for refusal on that basis. The planning conditions are there to mitigate that impact, and that is the purpose of a planning condition, and therefore it's our consideration that an inspector would feel exactly the same way. With regards to the concerns about the impact on healthcare, this is specifically referred in the report at 2.11. The CCG, as mentioned, have agreed that a contribution would be sufficient under the regulations of 122 of the SIL regs, which governs what you can actually get money for in terms of a planning obligation. That relates to fixed buildings or expansions of buildings or equipment. It can't be put towards revenue costs of staffing, and it's not considered by officers that there is a directly attributable impact from the result of this development to result in the lack of general practitioners in Thanet. It's very clear and evidence in the report why a cogent reason for refusal cannot be found with regards to that matter. In terms of impact on biodiversity, there is some issues that have been raised with regards to the lack of a breeding bird survey. This was directly addressed in the report last time with regards to what they'd submitted the applicant during the environmental impact assessment. There's a phase 1 habitat survey. This didn't pick up the presence of skylarks on site. The application has been referred to Natural England, who obviously decide on which species are protected and not. They have raised no objection to the development on the very specific grounds that they require a condition requiring a landscape and ecology management plan to be prepared at the detailed design stage, which is not what's being considered at the moment. It would be considered at reserve matter stage. So at that stage, it will be about getting that plan in, setting the measures for the establishment and management of the newly created and retained habitats. There will be an increase in biodiversity on this site, very clearly evidenced by the plans that have been submitted, and that has been agreed by KCC Biodiversity and by Natural England. In terms of some of the other issues that have been raised with regards to contamination, again, the officer report that's been put forward, which relays the comments of the contaminated land officer, as well as the Environment Agency, has looked specifically at whether or not there is concern about either existing contamination on the site or from surface water runoff. And again, a condition was considered sufficient by the Environment Agency and also by the contaminated land officer. In terms of the last issue with regards to drainage, this is specifically covered in the report that's at Annex 6, members. It specifically talks about foul drainage and network capacity. As you'll be aware, the provisions of the Water and Infrastructure Act requires Southern Water to agree for a connection to the drainage network under that legislation. But what they can require, and they have to require, is that there is sufficient capacity within the network for the dwellings to attach to it, and which is why they will often have a developer pay money to upgrade the existing capacity to cover that drainage. There is a specific condition which would be put on all strategic major sites such as this, which will basically mean that it restricts occupancy of the development until sewage infrastructure is provided as requested by Southern Water. Each phase would be restricted in occupation until the infrastructure for that phase has been agreed and provided, to ensure that there is no issues with regards to flooding or indeed capacity of the drainage network, and that is in compliance with the strategic policy in the local plan which talks about drainage. So to pick up the other point that the report covers, the council has received a letter from the applicant which is appended to the report, and this is discussed at 3.1 of the report. Now, this states that members could defer for approval subject to the full 30% affordable housing being provided on site as well as previous obligations, and this would rely on external funding becoming available or market changes that would make the development viable as time goes on, and when it becomes viable, the 106 agreement by the developer would then be signed on the basis of 30% affordable housing. Now, this is an option for members. It's not advised by officers, as the determination would be dependent on elements which are outside the council's control, as in whether or not the MRN bid comes forward or whether or not market conditions are there. So therefore the officer recommendation is still to defer and delegate for approval as outlined in 4.3. There's also a concern that it would open council for a non-determination appeal if effectively the decision is not made and it's waiting for the submission and agreement of the legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Detailed report there, and I know from the last meeting a lot of those questions, hopefully for members, have been answered.